Well, then, this is Mark. Good morning. We're going to roll. I know many of you may have your phones muted, and I'll remind you when we open up the lines for questions to unmute. I'm not seeing any issues with phone lines today on my Adobe Connect chat, so I'll presume we're all okay. Travis is on the line today. We are recording this session for future listening and viewing, and that will be on Basecamp within a few days. And Wendy is also with us today.
True.
There
Hello,
she is.
everyone.
Hi.
And this is webinar number 5, the fifth and last one we've planned. And today we're very pleased to have Josh Foster with us. Josh has a very long relative history in climate change, as it's a relatively new discipline, but he's been working in climate change for about 20 years, different parts of the country. He was with NOAA for quite a long time, and as the bio I sent out yesterday indicates, he's now in Oregon. And as we said during the little chit-chat, he has a long set of affiliations. He's with the Northwest Regional Climate Science Center and the Oregon Climate Change Research Institute and Oregon State University. So we very much appreciate you being with us today, Josh. And we've discussed this with Josh yesterday. He's going to do an initial piece of the webinar. Feel free to put questions up on the chat. And if we see some that need to be answered, then we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll take a break a ways in, and then we will break for questions and either take them from the chat or also ask you to unmute and ask questions. So thanks again, Josh, and go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Mark. I want to say I'm really happy to be here with all of you. Climate and water, especially at the extremely local level, is one of my favorite issue areas. And this is sort of a result of a fortuitous meeting between Wendy and I at the Kresge adaptation meeting a few months ago in Portland. So I'm also happy that happened. So I want to thank specifically Wendy and Mark for inviting me in, and Travis for supporting this. As I said, my name is Josh Foster. I worked at NOAA in Washington, D.C. for about 13 years and at some other nonprofit organizations, mainly focusing on climate adaptation. That's kind of my specialty. Currently, I'm talking to you from Corvallis, Oregon. I'm at Oregon State University. I manage 2 climate research. It's one of 8 regional climate research centers in the country, and also one funded by NOAA. It's known as the Climate Impacts Research Consortium, and our service area is Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and western Montana. So I'm going to give you basically, this is going to be somewhat of a whirlwind tour of climate resources. Mainly, I'm going to start at the federal level, and that's mainly where going to be my focus is. I spent most of my time at NOAA, so that's also the organization I'm going to focus on. Imagine we're kind of walking into the Library of Congress, and there's 7 million volumes there. I'm the reference librarian, and basically I'm going to kind of give you just a flavor of, sort of what's in my head in terms of a download, and then sort of point you in directions that you can get started in, and there are definitely people to help along the way, and I can help if you have specific questions. So dive in here. Basically the U.S. government's climate enterprise, so to speak, research enterprise and applications and services is organized under something called the U.S. Global Change Research Program. It's about a $2 billion program a year. A lot of it's invested in satellites, but there's at least $1 billion in all types of climate modeling research and monitoring and generation of information and services get delivered through the different agencies. There's 13 agencies in the Global Change Research Program, 13 agencies and departments. Right now they're involved in a update of the sort of U.S. something called the U.S. National Climate Assessment. So the program is divided into regions, and there's capability and assessments going on in different regions by all the agencies. I'm going to provide the slide, and then I provided a website on a web link on each slide. So if you're going back through this later, you want to look at it, then you can sort of click on to find out more information and be directed to that place. So all the acronyms of the agencies are across the bottom. You may be familiar with some of the symbols. The general organization, its Global Change Research Program is a coordinated office of the White House, sort of one of these interagency coordination policy bodies. But as I said down at the bottom, that's kind of the alphabet or acronym soup of the various agencies. If you want to go to get climate science, there's sort of key agencies to go to, NOAA being the main one, although NASA, Department of Energy, and National Science Foundation are also places to get good climate science information. If you want specific information about impacts in particular sectors like water or in particular areas wherever you happen to be located, then you can just go to the websites of the other agencies. If you type in climate or climate change, most of them have a climate website. They're usually pretty extensive. I mean, EPA has a very good climate website with lots of information. Department of Transportation now has a good climate website, so USDA. So I'm I was asked to more talk about the climate science, where you can find that information as opposed to sort of impacts and adaptation information, although I can talk about that as well if you want later on. The other sort of main organizing activity going on in the U.S. federal government right now is this interagency White House Adaptation Task Force. I bring this up because there is an effort by the Obama administration going on right now to really focus on developing adaptation in each of the agencies and the capability, and then with a very conscious of trying to serve the constituencies of each individual agency, so that there's this really sense that adaptation happens at the local level, and we really need to facilitate communities doing that adaptation, whether it's a city manager or you guys working in watersheds or rivers or things like that. So the federal government is sort of gearing up to say, yes, we're here to support whatever you guys are doing in this area, because you guys are really on the front lines, and you guys are going to be doing this. This is the one map. This is a great map, which I found in one of my colleagues' presentations, but I couldn't find where she actually got it from. Just to give you a flavor of the regional nature of the sort of distribution of services and information that goes on in the federal government, this is just a map of the capability of NOAA, Department of Interior, and USDA. As I said, I'll focus on NOAA, but what I really want to emphasize is that climate science is really managed and done at the regional level in the U.S. I mean, there's global models that go on, there's national efforts, but when it comes to really delivering information at the scale that's relevant, the federal government is geared up to deliver information at the regional level. So they have this lot of capabilities sort of divided up regional. I'm going to show a lot of maps going forward in this presentation, which just divides up the country into different regions, and there's these different service centers. So as well as things going on at the state level. So I sort of recommend to you that as you look at these maps or go back through, that you look for, well, where's the closest service center to me? Where's a point of contact where I can go and, there'll be somebody, a website or somebody that will pick up the phone or email, answer my questions. So NOAA has something called, they call their climate portal. It's under climate. They sort of captured the URL, the website climate.gov. So it's a pretty good website to have. So there's just a whole plethora of information on the NOAA Climate Services web portal. I'm just going to touch on a few things just to give you guys a flavor. One of the things they're developing, as I said, there's these national climate assessment reports that are going on. There's been a series of them done over the number of years, and there's annual reports that come out. They also have in this site things like fact sheets, a library of presentations you can look at if you're working on your own presentations, and just sort of other things like video recordings and stuff like that. So one of the key products I usually bring up is this Global Change Impacts in the United States. It's sort of a really good baseline of information. It was done in 2009. As I said, we're updating it now, of impacts across different sectors and in different regions of the U.S. So this is sort of a good baseline set of information. A lot of the people I've worked with, the cities, the counties, because I've worked a lot at the local level on climate adaptation, this is sort of a good reference guide. And then there's sort of other more current things like the State of the Climate annually comes out in 2010, things like that. So other types of things that they're focused on are educational activities. so if you're, teaching a class or teaching a course or something like that, to like a training course, or if you're looking for other types of multimedia resources, there's things on this website. And one of my favorites is Climate Literacy Guide. I actually helped work on it to some degree. It's a really good sort of baseline guide that if you're talking to people, it sort of explains like what's a climate literate person, what should somebody know about climate to be considered sort of knowledgeable about it, like connections between CO2 and temperature. What is the greenhouse effect? Sort of things like that, and sort of it's geared at different levels. I mean, it's broadly notes like what should an elementary school student know, what should a middle school student know, what should a college student know. So I find this is a good sort of baseline resource to look at. Obviously, there's data and services, and a lot of them are maps. They have this integrated map application. This is all, this website is a Flash website, so if you go there, there's a lot of kind of clicks and animations and things like that, and data maps that come up there embedded in the site. So they have global climate maps, they have maps for the U.S., and they have regional level maps, and then even down to local level climatology. So you can click on that link there to go to that. Sort of getting more into this sort of the components of NOAA that provide climate information. There's a number of different data and prediction centers in the U.S. that do climate work. Two of the sort of most prominent and best known ones that are the best resource are the Climate Prediction Center and the National Climatic Data Center. You can see them on the map to the right. I'm going to be using this kind of map, this web page a bit to sort of explain different components in NOAA. So here's just one product of the Climate Prediction Center. They do monthly, seasonal, yearly sort of forecasts of, and also shorter outlooks of things like temperature and precipitation and other types of information. They provide them in probability maps. So you can sort of get a sense of, is it going to be above normal, below normal, or kind of a normal, winter in terms of temperature or precipitation or things like that. They also put out things like a hazard outlook going forward the next, this is more or less the next week. And then they have things like where is it likely to flood, where are we going to have heavy rain, severe weather or winds and things like that. So a lot of what I'm going to be showing you is information that isn't necessarily about climate change, although there is obviously climate change information embedded in these websites. But I sort of want to make the point that what the federal government has a lot to offer is a lot of sort of past, current, and near future information going out a year or so, or maybe out to the next decade or the next couple of months on water, on water flows, on precipitation. What I've been working on for years is this idea that to prepare for climate change in the future, that if we learn to manage our current extremes of events and current sort of climate and variability going into the future, that we'll be getting down the road towards being prepared for climate change when maybe the variability increases or the return frequency of storm comes back. So that's why I'm sort of, so if you think like, well, where's the climate change information, then that's why I'm doing it this way. And I'll note where some of the information is. So there's other centers, the National Climatic Data Center. Obviously, they're more focused on data archive and creating tools for past and current climate instead of doing the forecasting. In many of these websites, there are points of contact. So when I'm talking about these different resources, there's almost always somebody that you can reach on the phone or on email. So, and we're all sort of funded by the public, so therefore, you're our constituents, and we're here to sort of provide information. So I just wanted to highlight in this particular thing that there's a climate fact, frequently asked questions, and also a help fact. If you want to sort of, I have a question about where to find some data, then you can dig into the help fact and sort of gives you a little bit of guidance about where to go on the website. One of the sort of best things for, and as you can see, it's pretty easy. Global climate change you can click on. You can click on information about El Nino, heavy precipitation events, temperature and droughts and things like that. So this is kind of a nice little hub website that connects you up. I just realized that I did not provide the URL on this particular one, but I think you can just click on. I think you can click on it from the main website and get to it. So. The other capabilities of NOAA, besides data archiving and forecasting, they also have this very extensive lab system, and many of the labs are working on climate modeling and climate research. Two of the best known ones are the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Lab in Princeton, New Jersey, and the Earth Systems Research Lab in Boulder, Colorado. The GFDL lab in Princeton does a lot of the global modeling for all of the climate negotiations and climate research that goes on, you've probably heard. And the lab in Boulder does sort of a much more sort of mix of different types of research on air, atmosphere, ocean, and they also have a division that sort of works specifically on sort of climate services research and things like that. So just one of their many products, they have this map room. ESRL stands for Earth System Research Lab. So they just have just a mess of maps, which you can go into. I know that, again, it's probably going to be a little bit of a challenge to say, oh my God, there's so many maps, and where's the local information, et cetera. But this is if you want sort of more global information, U.S. regional information of many different types, sort of trend information, exceedance information, things like that. So this is one example to explore. The other thing that you might be interested in, NOAA has, you may know about the river forecast centers already, but these might be of greatest use to you because they obviously deal in basin scale and river networks, which is what you guys work on. So there is, let's see, I think about 12 or more river forecast center regions. So you can kind of find where the ones that's closest to you or what basin your work is located in. And they just have, again, many different types of resources. And they're one of the places in NOAA that really joins climate and water sort of river forecast fasting with the climate dimension of that, weather and climate dimension of that. So this is a really good place to sort of look at those sorts of issues. Just as one example of their product, this is the Columbia River Basin, and they just have this product that shows different places where you're having major floods going on, moderate floods, or sort of this is kind of an operational, like what's going on right now, snapshot map, which again, may be useful to you, as you're sort of getting a sense about what type of climate events are going on in my region, sort of connected with other types of information you can get, like stream gauges and things like that. The Weather Service in NOAA is also divided up into 8 regions. And what's useful to know about this is that there's 122 weather forecast offices in the country, regional and local. So again, sort of look for what the nearest one is to you. And although the Weather Service isn't necessarily set up to deal with climate or climate change, often they're the best source of local weather and climate information because, if they don't, you can call them up or email them, and if they don't have the answer to the question, they can probably find it. Often some of the places have a person who is expert on climate on staff. Not all of them. It really depends on the office, whether they have somebody who's interested in climate. So, and definitely near-term climate, they have that. So again, don't underestimate the fact that your local weather office may have, the information that you need in terms of climate. Now, similar to the Weather Service, NOAA has set up these regional climate services directors. They will know much more about what's going on in your region in terms of climate. They're really good sort of coordinators, hubs, houses, and they're specifically set up to basically answer people's questions. I have a climate question. I'm in California. What's going on in my region? So, that's an opportunity. There's a web link to there, so you can find out who your individual contact for the region is. Did everybody hear me? I heard some kind of clicking. You still okay?
I'm hearing you fine, Josh, so I think, yeah.
Okay. I think somebody was trying to maybe call into me, so I was maybe getting a phone call. Anyway, there's a number of other good products that I really like that NOAA provides. The U.S. Drought Portal is I think, a really good product for sort of climate and water. A whole variety of different types of information about what's going on with drought in the country. On this particular, what you're looking at right now, the upper graphic is actually the seasonal drought outlook. So it kind of says what is going to happen with drought in the next, number of months, 3 to 6 months. But I also really like the Drought Monitor, which is relatively new product for NOAA within the last 15 years, but it's a huge sort of twice monthly effort of a whole number of people who get together and basically assess what's going on with drought right now in the country, from sort of abnormally dry up to extreme drought. And as you can see, Texas has been very dry for the last 6 months, and it was much worse in previous months. You can see a little dry spot down in Florida. But to me, this is really good to sort of get a snapshot of what's going on in my region in terms of dry and what can I expect in the next couple of months. There's also, for those of you who work along the coast, NOAA has a lot of coastal capability. We're kind of the coastal, NOAA is kind of the coastal science and services agency. So it's the Sea Grant program is a partnership of state and local governments in the coastal region. Usually universities are involved also doing sort of, coastal extension. So they've also spun up quite a bit of activities on climate at the moment going forward. Especially at the community level. They've actually funded quite a few community pilots on coastal community and climate adaptation. Then there's also the NOAA Coastal Services Center, which actually has 8 centers around the country. I actually could not find a map of them, but their website is really quite excellent. They have this new product called Digital Coasts, and it's just, I went through it, and there's just an unbelievable amount of information on there. But just on the top level page here, you have a coastal inundation toolkit, sea level rise, coastal flooding impact viewer, the role of land use and adaptation to increase precipitation and flooding. So just on their top page, they have 3 useful products for folks working on climate change or climate adaptation, sort of in the coastal area or coastal basins. So I think that's kind of a very quick tour of NOAA. So NOAA's climate capability. So if there's any particular questions, I can stop now.
And go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Mark. This is Elizabeth Riggs. Josh, thanks a lot. I just wanted to mention that with our Great Lakes RISA,
Great.
On a climate project that we're doing right now, and it's just been phenomenal to have access to their researchers, and it's very much a iterative process with them where they want to be sure that what they're producing can be usable and useful to the practitioners. So I just wanted to say that this has been our first interaction with GLISA, and it's been very.
Yeah, one thing I didn't say in my introduction, that the NOAA center that I manage is the RISA for the Northwest. It's the Climate Impacts Research Consortium. So I was early on involved in the RISA program, and then now I'm running one. So yeah, thanks for the plug on that. RISA's the RISA is coming up later in my presentation.
Okay, great.
So and GLISA is a very good RISA, and they're relatively new, but they've really come on strong. So thanks for mentioning that.
Sure.
I get kind of confused, Josh, this is Wendy, between climate services and weather services.
Yep.
What's the difference?
Well, there's a little bit of a overlap. We like to sort of say in the climate community a rule of thumb that climate's anything beyond 2 weeks. That weather is basically, the focus is collecting data for immediate forecasting of the weather variables that you experience. Wind, climate, temperature, precipitation, and they can forecast at best out to about 2 weeks. And then everything else beyond that is pretty much climate. So that's really the dividing line. Now, it kind of blurs because the Weather Service provides information going out months and years and even decades in terms of information. But the key thing is the degree to which they're operationally forecasting. So a Weather Service basically provides a robust, reliable, 24/7 capability to forecast kind of what's coming at us. And that's their kind of job to do that. The climate people are more about understanding what the trends are, what's coming down the road, what's happened in the past, sort of collecting that data, analyzing it, understanding it, and then making it available on a longer time frame. Maybe weekly, maybe monthly, maybe only once a year they come out with information. And then providing sort of more broad assessments about what the impacts and things are going to be. So there's often a little bit of a culture clash because the weather guys are much higher tempo, and they're like, we don't care about climate, we just want to do weather, and that's about warning people and saving lives. And the climate community is like, well, we were trying to understand the whole system and, provide useful information to people, and all you guys want to do is just throw that stuff out there, people, So it's been a sort of a work in progress over the years about getting the two communities to work together, but I think there's becoming much more of an overlap and a consciousness about the value of the two, that obviously climate impacts weather, weather impacts climate, so working together to understand what the optimal services are to provide in the way people can understand that information is sort of, that's become the more collective mission. So.
Well, yeah, and then I get frustrated because it seems like the guys on the 10 o'clock news have been only talking to themselves or something. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the challenge is meteorologists, they're trained in a particular culture, and they may not always have an appreciation of the sort of longer-term issues connected with climate. I mean, they learn about it, but again, it's sort of when I first came to NOAA, there was actually many people who said you can't forecast climate. You can forecast weather, but you can't forecast climate. And there's a big culture clash. And so I think that when you look at sort of day-to-day weather and the statistics, and then thinking about forecasting trends, years, decades, centuries in advance, it's sort of easy to see why they might be somewhat skeptical of that sort of approach. So I think that's one of the reasons you might find TV weather people are often skeptical because they're just coming from a different sort of different culture, different scientific culture that sort of lends itself to skepticism about sort of trends in climate and things like that. So some of them aren't even trained scientists either who are on the news, so that's another problem.
And I'll ask if out in the audience, are there questions for Josh right now? I know he went over a lot of information there related to NOAA, and we intended for it to go quickly as a snapshot because you're in so many different locations. Any questions right now?
Yeah, this is Amelia. I have a question. I'm not familiar with the river forecast centers, so that sounded cool. I was just wondering if you have examples of how people outside of NOAA have used that resource.
Well, it kind of depends on what exactly you need to do with the information. I mean, one of the primary functions of the river forecast centers are to forecast, like for emergency management, when there's a major threat of a flood. The river forecast centers are really the place in NOAA that people turn to. So the weather forecast office go to the river forecast center and going, okay, we got to issue a flood warning. What's the definitive answer on whether there's going to be a flood? What's going to be the stage that the river is going to be at a particular time? So then emergency managers use that information to say, okay, do we need to evacuate or not? I know that's more of a short term than a climatological example, but again, it sort of depends on what you want to use it for, because the RFCs have a lot of data available, and so it kind of depends on what question you're asking, and then what sort of going there and saying, okay, do they have this data that can help me answer that question? Unfortunately, sort of shorter term, so it won't necessarily have they won't necessarily have climate change information at the river forecast center, but they may, or they may have they may be able to answer your questions or tell you where you could get information to answer your questions. But again, they're part of the weather service, so they're a little bit more in that operational realm, as I was talking about. So.
And Josh, there's a note on the chat, if you can see that, about the river forecast center.
Yep. Great. Cool. So have you, what do you, I mean, I don't know if you want to get into a conversation here. I'm just curious what when there's a flood risk for your area, do you guys get involved in that, professionally, or is that more, you guys are more, that's just sort of something that's going on? Or do you guys use flood risk information in your daily jobs, or?
Yeah, so this is Liz. So no, we're not emergency people.
Okay.
But we, as we're doing our work on how the Boise River should be managed and how our communities should improve our preparedness for climate change and this and that, the river forecast, not only does it say what's happening on the river, right now, and what the professionals say it's going to look like, in the next 7 days or so, which could be, moving into serious flooding, which really doesn't, in our river doesn't happen very often. So most of the time it's totally boring when you look there because nothing's happening. But they've gone through all the research to do all the description of if the river comes to this level, it's going to, it gives all the specifics, the green belt at such and such area will be inundated, such and such street will be inundated, the houses in the parks, and so they give a lot of detail. So it's our way to be able to say to people, well, gosh, look even if the water just comes up to this level, it's going to have serious impacts. And boy, look, if it comes to that level, look what the impacts are going to be. So to personalize it, to make it be legitimate and not just environmentalists mouthing off.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing they might have is they might have return frequencies. So they may or may not be able to make some statement about, are bigger floods coming more often. I think that's a big major message of climate change right now is, it's things that were normally like, the 50-year flood is now going to be the 10-year flood. So you're going to get these big floods every 10 years instead of every 50 years. Then, are we going to have the big crisis flood? When's the most gigantic flood going to come in 50 years? It's more like, no, you're going to have a pretty big flood every year, every 5 years or whatever. So that's
Thanks.
That's a great insight in terms of
any other
what could happen.
Any other questions from the group right now? Okay, Josh, then let's move into your next section.
Okay. What I'm moving into now is more of the partnerships. I mentioned Sea Grant as one previous partnership, so that's kind of an example of a state-federal. One of the other big groups that are funded by NOAA cooperatively with states are these regional climate centers. They're really more than anything data repositories. They take information from the NOAA forecast centers, the forecast offices around the country, and they consolidate it. Then they send it to the National Climatic Data Center, as I noted. So their primary job is archiving data, but what they also do is they have a service component where they basically take that data, depending on the center, and they create information for that particular region. So believe it or not, according to one of my colleagues, they create 8,000, the RCCs each create 8,000 maps a day. So basically, if you have any conceivable question about what is sort of going on climate, weather, precip, flows, atmospheric conditions, whatever, in your area or in your region, they'll probably have some map that's related. Now, again, you probably need to have a little bit of guidance about how to make it useful to you, and because they are service centers, they have people that are available to help. The same colleague actually supplied this slide, says he's answered the phone something like 45,000 times in his careir to answer people's questions. So I don't know where he would sleep if he did that, but he doesn't sleep a whole lot. So, so anyway, a lot of people aren't aware of the regional climate centers, which are really good, also good sources of climate information, climate data. This is just one of the examples of one of their mapping tools that they have for the Western region, basically creating for fine-scale climate information. I actually helped fund this project, so was involved in it from fairly early on. So, and getting down to even sort of more of a sort of state, local level, each state has a state climatologist. And normally at this time, I'm in a room and I ask everybody, how many of you know your state climatologist? Generally, maybe only 1 or 2 out of 40 people will raise their hand. So the state climatologist is often a really untapped resource, and they really will know a lot more about the local and state level about climate in your area than the NOAA people. Our actually center, the Oregon Climate Change Research Center, actually houses the Oregon Climate Service. So the state climatologist is actually in our office. He's actually my boss. So. It somewhat varies, though. State climatologists are usually at universities a lot of times, and they're, sometimes they're just like it's a part-time position, like a professor is doing it. So it sort of depends on how active they are, but, a lot of times, they're providing, they have a really good website. They talk to the media a lot, so they're kind of aware of what's going on. The Oklahoma Climate Service has 80 people working for it, so they're much more well-funded state effort. So it kind of depends again on what state you're in and what your region is in. You can find them. There's this new thing called the American Association of State Climatologists, which is sort of the map and clearinghouse for the whole activity. And this is down to the locations of the different state climatologists around the country. So you can kind of eyeball quickly, like, oh, where's my state climatologist located? And again, they're probably going to be at a university, but they almost all have websites. So it's another good way to find them. And here, as noted, the RISA. The RISA is funded by NOAA. It's a university federal partnership. The universities basically bring interdisciplinary researchers together, climate scientists, economists, hydrologists, ecologists, even anthropologists, geographers. And our job, me being, given that I help manage one of the RISAs, is again to bring climate research together, mostly university researchers together with decision makers at the local level to test concepts of risk management on climate change, climate extremes, and figure out basically ways to make better decisions, sort of testing the different approaches. We're not necessarily operational. We're not, operating 24/7. We'll pick up the phone. We're obviously going to pick up the phone if people have questions, but we're not sort of set up as a service entity. We're still researchers, but we do the best we can to sort of serve our regions. And as you can tell, we don't cover the entire U.S. The federal government is working on filling in the map. They just added GLESA, the Great Lakes one, and the new one in the New York area. But right now they're sort of missing New England and missing High Plains and High Midwest and Mid-Atlantic in terms of coverage. So I would encourage you, as I think was it Liz who said that you've been working with the GLESA. Sorry if I don't
yeah, that's okay. Elizabeth Riggs in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
In Ann Arbor, okay.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth's working with the GLESA. So there's a really good example of one of you, member of your network, who's been working with a RISA. So I encourage all of you to kind of, if you have one in your area, to look them up and see how you might collaborate with them if you haven't already. Then just a quick nod, jump over to the USGS, to the Department of Interior. I also manage the Northwest Climate Science Center. There's 8 of them around the country. The differences, the main difference that I see between the RISAs and the climate science centers are that they're mainly focused on the Department of Interior community. So the sort of plethora of land management, public and state level land management that's going on. So there's a ton of sort of forestry work and sort of watershed work and things that are going on, mainly focused on, again, land management, fire issues, and sort of other types of more sort of natural environment type focus, which might be actually more useful for you in some ways to talk to the CSCs, because they have sort of access to Fish and Wildlife Service and other types of communities that are working on more ecological sort of focus of climate. There's also these things that called landscape conservation cooperatives you may have heard of. They sort of divided up the country into 22 different regions. Each CSC serves multiple different conservation cooperative regions. They were first designed or proposed based on bird migration areas, so that's kind of why they're organized in this particular shape. But recently they've been stood up or created based on a focus on climate and sort of this management of climate based on regional scale climate information and the need to manage climate at kind of a landscape level. So I think this is pretty innovative, because normally we don't tend to manage our resources at the watershed or landscape level because of the way our political units work. So the more we can do to sort of manage at the landscape level, manage at the watershed level, the better. So this is just one sort of what I see as an innovative approach. Anyway, so this was another break for questions. That part was a little bit shorter. So.
USGS, the gauging system, and how does that tie into this?
Well, in terms of what the USGS is doing in the climate science centers, or
maintaining data and as we close gauges, what does that impact?
Yeah, this is an extremely serious challenge. I mean, one thing that when I was at NOAA, we often worked very hard to make the connection between shutting down the stream gauge system and the challenge for climate management. That data that's sort of coming through a different section of this federal government, not the climate community, but coming from the more hydrological community, is really an essential for 2 reasons. One is that as we look at trends in the research and we try to improve the models, we try to link the global models to the regional models to the hydrological models to understand what's going on in the future. So if we say, well, we have this climate model, we kind of know what the climate's going to be like in this region in the future, but we really want to understand what the flow, what the hydrology is going to be in the future. We really need that stream gauge data to feed into the model. Then, conversely, once we have that information, or once we're sort of providing climate information or climate forecasts let's say on the shorter version, on the shorter time scale, the stream gauges are really, essential for providing useful management information to say, okay, you're managing water in your particular area, you're doing risk assessment or whatever, to provide actually useful information to people based on the climate, based on connecting the climate information to the hydrological information. Really need that stream gauge information. So I'm
So is it pretty well connected right now?
It's getting there. I mean, for example, in the drought information system that I showed, that's a multi-agency partnership that's led by NOAA, and the stream gauge, a lot of the hydrological information is on that website accompanying the drought information. So the flow information, stream gauge type information, so that when you look on that website, there's a connection there. In the federal government in general, I don't, that's variable. I mean, I'm not sure if there's a lot of climate people would necessarily think of the stream gauges as necessarily the most important thing to their work. And then at higher levels in the government, I think it's still a bit of a struggle. I think there's some members of the Congress who oversee the funding of USGS. They're most likely aware of the stream gauge network and its sort of decline. But the problem is monitoring is just not a sexy issue, and it's hard to get funding. And you guys know this. It's often hard to get funding for monitoring systems, especially in tight budget times. And we're just still struggling to make that connection that this is really about understanding future threats. That if we don't have this information, we're kind of blind to these future threats that are coming down because we won't be immediately aware of them because we won't have the system in place to do the immediate monitoring, and we won't be able to project and understand the future because we won't have that data that can feed into the forecast systems either. So, my view is that we just like we kind of need an overhaul of the water system in the U.S. and the highway system in the U.S., we need sort of an environmental and monitoring overhaul as well, particularly, I think, sort of at the river and basin level.
Yeah, and especially if we're going to try to track useful information around temperature and water quality and withdrawal.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. For in-stream flow, water quality. Absolutely.
Other questions on the phone line right now? I'm going to ask one, Josh.
Okay.
Often people running projects need people to give talks, and you've gone through lots of resources here.
Yeah.
How do you suggest, are there particular places where people might be available to give talks to local audiences on climate?
It very much depends on sort of what type of a talk you need and where you're located. I mean, one good thing about our system in the U.S., federal, state, local, is that we're sort of blessed, despite budget times, with a sort of abundance of different resources, informationally and people.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say any of the things that I've mentioned could be potential. I mean, we get a lot of requests either in the RESA or in the state climatology, the Oregon Climate Service Office, for do talks. I mean, my boss and our state climatologists probably give, including myself, we probably give like 100, maybe 100 talks a year to different groups and organizations. I know that the Weather Forecast Office, that they get called up to give climate talks. They don't always have the best information in terms of they basically, there's a National Weather Service sort of template where they kind of, here's what as a Weather Service employee, here's what you can say about climate. So they have their little presentation, they can go on and give it. But some of them, are more creative and they add on to it or things like that. Regional Climate Center, they give talks. As I said, my friend who's answered the phone 45,000 times, he probably gives at least 100 talks a year to different groups. So it's really a matter of, just sort of calling and asking and saying,
okay,
here's the type of talk I need. Can you do it, or do you know somebody who can do it? Those non-government organizations, environmental organizations like Natural Resource Defense Council, like if you have a local office, sometimes they have a climate person, and if you want to talk about water and climate and environment, sometimes those are the best people, to talk about it, if you happen to have an expert in your area.
And Rebecca, Rebecca chimed in from Oklahoma about their state climatologist giving a great talk on the chat line. And I agree that in Colorado, Nolan Doskin, for years, he gives great talks on weather and climate.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Yeah, you're blessed to have Oklahoma, to be in Oklahoma, because they just have such a great capacity there for all things climate.
Well, if there aren't any more right now, then move on to your next piece.
Jump in, yep. So this is sort of going down to my state level. We're kind of leaving the government. I'm going to the nonprofit sector. The best resource I found on state level things, sort of compendium of state level activities that are going on, are the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. They used to be the Pew Climate Center, located in Arlington, Virginia. But what they've done over the last 5 years is they've been funded to keep up a database of state level climate activities. And they have a clickable map of climate action plans. They have a clickable map of state climate legislative commissions and executive branch advisory groups. And then they have a clickable map, which you're seeing here, of state adaptation plans. So to me, this is a really great way to say, okay, what's going on in my state in terms of climate adaptation? This is a little bit more on the policy and bureaucratic level, but you can also use that to sort of enter into your system and kind of drill down into what's going on in adaptation. And states like Maryland is very advanced in their adaptation planning. California, Oregon, and Washington State are advanced. Massachusetts, New York have done a lot. Florida, Alaska. And so there's a lot of, it's really, to me, if you're doing adaptation in your state, it's really helpful to drill in this way. Another really good sort of general source of climate information of all different types is Climate Central. They're a relatively new group funded at Princeton University, and they just have tons of different types of useful information on sort of general climate videos and podcasts and modules for teaching and talking about it. And then this is sort of one of their newest things, which is just this cool sea level rise tool, which is a little bit more dynamic, kind of shows you what the return frequency is for different sea level rise impacts are going into the future around the different parts of the sort of coastal U.S. So this is sort of I put this in here because I just wanted to illustrate Climate Central is cool, and they kind of have these big cool products. Another product of Climate Central is things like, this is the phenology or the behavior of sort of plants and animals within the context of climate change. And this is another I thought was really sort of just one of their many compelling slides they have, looking at the degree to which this particular spring, how many places in the U.S. That spring has arrived so many days early, which to me is also a really powerful way to explain to people, climate change just isn't something that's happening, 30 years in the future. It's like, here's a really prime example to illustrate that it is happening now, right in your state, in your neighborhood, so to speak. Natural Resource Defense Council, this is an example of a product that they just put out, which is not exactly a climate product, but it's also a great way to drill down into, say, well, what's going on at my state level in terms of what's going on with water in my state. It's a good question about, wonder when they define when spring's arriving. I think, I don't know, it might have to do with, I should know better, but there might be an average temperature signal. It might be based on other sorts of phenological data having to do with tree flowering and things like that. But that's a really good question. I'd have to check that out.
Isn't it frost-free days? Number of frost-free days or something?
It might be frost-free.
Degree days.
I mean, yeah, I don't know if there's an achieved temperature threshold, maybe. I have to actually admit that I'm not actually a climatologist myself. I was trained as a political scientist, so I've been on the whole policy end for years. I'm sort of a self-taught climatologist. I know enough to sort of find my way around, answer a few questions, and be dangerous. So I just rely on my climatologist colleagues when I have questions. This is an example with Climate Central again. This is their thing they call Climapedia, which they have many different modules, many different products like this, but this is just one where, like, hey, you want to talk about, I'm having challenges talking to skeptics. Here's a good example of, they have a podcast that sort of tells you how to talk to skeptics. you want to talk about CO2, what's the whole sort of CO2 thing, they have this here. What's going on in my particular region in terms of climate? Here's a podcast about how to work at it. So I encourage you, that's a good site to explore. I just threw this slide in. These are sort of all my favorite sort of climate. I need some climate information. I need to talk about climate. I need to give a talk to students or give a talk to people I'm training in my river basin. You've heard about CAKE before. CAMEL is sort of a new resource, kind of similar to CAKE, but more focused on training activities. Adaptation Clearinghouse is another resource from the Georgetown Law Center, more legally oriented. It's kind of like CAKE too, but more legally entered. Realclimate.org is a good site in terms of real hardcore climate scientists. Basically, these guys, whenever there's a controversy about climate, scientifically in the media, these guys basically rebut whatever misstatements are said about the science, and they say this is sort of truth to the science. This is what we actually do know. And so there's sort of that quality control. Like if you're saying, well, I'm sort of confused. They're saying climate's one way, climate's this way. These guys are sort of where you can go and kind of myth bust. Like, I want to find out what's truth from fiction. So if you can understand climate science to a fairly high degree, this is a good place to go to kind of sort that out. And there's a few other sources. This Climate Change Atlas is a good resource put together by a colleague of mine, and Greg Craven is sort of this funny kind of Bill Nye the Science guy who's professor, I think, in England, who's done a bunch of videos on talking about climate science and wears Viking helmets and sort of does funny things. So it's a great sort of resource to sort of get people sort of a little bit more amused and engaged when they're hearing about this stuff. So I guess that's it. I mean, believe it or not, it's my last slide, and I just sort of tacked on my four of my favorite resources for climate communications. The best resource for climate communications generally is Yale Center, and then the George Mason Center is also a really good one. They're doing some of the most cutting-edge research on opinion polling, on climate communications in the country. And again, they're really good sources for sorting out, sort of fact from fiction and how to talk about it and how to sort of convey to people in a useful way, sort of what's at stake. And the big thing that's really going on, and I'll end here, is what we really are moving into. I mean, climate has sort of reached the level of a culture war here, where it's sort of like he said, she said, we want to believe that, you want to believe that, and we're just like nobody can really help each other. Nobody wants to budge, but what we really are is getting into a values discussion here. It's like, what do people really value at the local level? And that's sort of the prevailing wisdom right now about how to, not necessarily with an overture about climate, but people care about clean water, watersheds. They care about energy security. They care about the health of their kids. So to be able to relate those values to climate, sort of in a kind of inobtrusive kind of way, is a really good way to sort of open dialogue, get people to open their minds a little bit, rather than just saying, climate change is going to happen. We got to sacrifice, and you can't drive your SUV anymore. I mean, it just doesn't. That we've proven that it doesn't really work at this point. So anyway, I'll just sort of leave that in as chance for discussion about this particular issue or anything else that we've discussed that I've presented on before.
So the idea of a single climate portal, we have, portal proliferation, someone said the other day.
Exactly.
We have a lot of universities that are getting into the game, and I guess eventually they'll each have sort of what they're best at, because I sure hope they're not just listing the same resources over and over.
Well, I mean, what's good about the research community being engaged on generating information in these portals is that they're creating information. I mean, so every university has its strengths, and by working together, I mean, that's one of the principles of the RISA is that, for example, we're really strong in climate modeling. So we're kind of putting together the next generation of climate models, currently for the Northwest and to some degree for the West, but perhaps for the whole rest of the country, and making it available for everybody. So other RISAs like GLISA is much better, is doing great on the whole sort of lake climate and lake management. So yes, there's a proliferation. Yes, you need docents to sort of help you drill down in to find what you need. But I personally think it's a positive thing because I think there's sort of a myth of the one-stop shop. Because even one-stop shops are usually a collection of things gathered together from different places that may exist somewhere else, and a whole bunch of people are working on it, and you can just as easily go to their website and get what you need from them directly. So what's better is having, the way I like to think about it is sort of like a network of networks, or portals of portals, so to speak, I think is the way to look at this point.
Okay, and this is the piece where I don't know how many of you saw it in the email yesterday, where I was suggesting that we were going to have Josh available as an additional resource to talk about communications on climate change, because I know many of you are engaged in this. So either start typing in, or anyone want to jump on the phone right now and begin a conversation.
I mean, can anybody share their experiences with? Because we're always curious. What's the sort of groundswell right now? I mean, people come to us and say, yeah, I have this planning meeting, every third Wednesday of the month, and these skeptics always show up, and now they're saying we can't do land use planning because it's like it's like a UN plot. So to me, I'm kind of curious, like what you guys encounter in terms of skepticism about climate, in your work. I mean, just as one question to throw out there.
This is Liz in Boise, and well, part of it is that that the climate change is used by some of our more powerful interests, namely the irrigators, because they say that they're going to need a new dam since climate change is going to be lessening the amount of water supply kept in snowpack, and since we don't have enough reservoirs capacity right now to hold all the liquid water supply, and since Mother Nature isn't going to be doing it for us in the terms of, late spring snowpack, we need to build a new reservoir. So they were easy to get, they changed their mind. I mean, I don't know if they were ever against climate change, but they definitely, you get them in a room, and they're like the first one to say, well, climate change, that's why we have to build a new dam. So
right,
we can't say that we're really happy about that. But for the most part, I think that we just stopped talking about it, and we talk about we just jump right through to effects, droughts, uncertainty, and so on. And because pretty much everything that needs to be done in terms of climate preparedness is stuff that should be being done anyway. So, and then when you talk about, well, are you going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from Idaho and that kind of thing, then Idaho Power isn't saying that there's no. They're saying that they want to have clean energy too, to some extent. So, but my question, really, this is what I thought yesterday. This is like a little esoteric, but it's a good question, I think. So, do you think that Al Gore did more good or harm on the climate change thing? When I thought about it yesterday, because it was some, in Tennessee now they can't even talk about climate change in the schools without saying that maybe climate change isn't really happening, and I'm just like, why are people like so fired up and taking this whole climate change thing so personally, adversely personally, and is it all just because that they associate it with, Al Gore? So there's your political science question of the day.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I personally think it's mixed, and it's probably significantly overblown. I mean, my view is that Al Gore did a great service to the world by creating a compelling vehicle for communicating about climate through his movie, and then bringing it to the attention of the world and start getting the conversation happening. I mean, the ironic thing is that 10 years ago, more of the country believed in climate change and thought that the government should do about it than do now.
Yeah.
And so I think that you can't really blame Al Gore for then becoming a whipping boy or or focusing focus of anger of a movement, of political movement, well organized, well funded, to basically discredit climate change. So he's just, you can't, again, he was trying to bring a compelling issue to the attention of the policymakers in the world. Climate scientists do that every day. They've been doing it for 20 or 30 years on climate change. I mean, heck, they were talking about climate change back in the 1950s and even before that. So,
but he happened to be extremely prominent liberal Democrat, a politician.
That's correct.
You know, he wasn't like a Nobel. I mean, he did end up winning.
He did win
but
the
before
Nobel
that, you know, he wasn't. You know, he didn't come from the scientific community. He didn't come from the academic community, or even, you know, like the Lois Gibbs, you know, from the neighborhood watch type of thing. He came directly out of, you know, the Clinton White House.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's enough on that one. But that, I just, you know, it's like, man, you have to be careful who your messengers are. You can't
that is true, and you know, it's more, to some degree, how he carried the water, you know, sort of afterwards, that, you know, he kind of became the guru in chief for climate. So therefore he became a target thing. But see, I'm actually somewhat optimistic, because I think when when an issue gets to this level of conflict, it means that you're succeeding. I mean, it means that the people who are opposed to you, the smoking thing was the same way. I mean, it's like, you know, the closer you get to people actually generating a consensus on action, the more desperate the people to keep the status quo fight. Right. And so that's in part what all these climate change communications groups are doing, is that they're actually surveying what people actually believe in the U.S. in a very, very rigorous kind of way, and updating it very frequently now, so that we can sort out fact from myth. And it's if you really look at it, there's a huge sleeping sort of center of the minority politically in this country that not only believes in climate change, but you know, wants something done about it and feels it's a risk. The majority of this country, and what's the problem is that the way the media portrays the issue is polarizing, because it makes for better stories, and so as a consequence, there's an outside influence of this small minority, and we end up pandering and focusing on just these skeptical people. I mean, the Tea Party is 300,000 people out of a planet of 7 billion, most of who believe that climate change is a threat. And so we're pandering to those 300,000 people that, you know, we have to basically, you know, not do anything because we have to assuage them. You know, I mean, granted, they have outsized political power. That's because they're backed by, you know. Sorry if I'm getting off on a political soapbox.
Well, anyway, but I mean, so you just can look at, I mean, it was just because of that news story on the Tennessee vote that just happened this last week. You know, I mean, and of course they're going back to take shots at evolution too. So, you know.
Right, well,
We're in good company. Anyway,
well, I mean, when somebody asked me this question a couple of days ago about what to do about this, and I just say you again, target the big center. I mean, you're going to have skeptics. They're going to come and beat you up. And make it meaningful in terms of their values, which you said you're already doing. So that's great.
Yeah. Thanks.
I'm going to ask a quick one, Josh. Could you give out a quick factoid? Because I think it's significant that much of the developed world is working more actively on climate change than we are.
Developing? Oh, I mean other developed world countries.
The other developed world countries, yes.
Yeah.
Besides the U.S. What's a good way to say that in an audience, and what's an effective way to say that in an audience when you're confronted by skeptics or with the group?
Oh boy, yeah, because that's a good question. Because you know, you can always say that, you know, other developed countries are socialist countries or something like that. I mean, I think ultimately the core principle, which has been raised for many years, is the concept of risk management and hedging. And I mean, I think everybody can agree with that. You know, whether you're a conservative farmer or a water manager, is that we manage risks every day. I mean, that's why we have insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, what other countries are doing is they have looked at the evidence. They have seen that there is a credible threat You can debate its cause, you can debate how credible it is, but what they're doing is they're taking steps for risk management. And that's what the rest of the world is doing, and to a very real extent, if you're in Canada, there's risk management, federal government, if you're in Sweden or the Netherlands, but a lot of these countries going over to developing countries, they're doing it because they're already experiencing climate change and they're already experiencing threats, whether there's droughts or sea level rise. In the Netherlands, they're doing huge amounts on climate adaptation because they're already below sea level, and they're having they've had flood problems because the rivers come down. They're actually having more problems with river flooding than they are with sea level rise. But they're doing a very comprehensive activity in the country to generate flood areas that can flood, particularly if dikes fail, and also making these sort of water-based cities where they have lots of water in the cities, flowing through the city and canals and things like that to sort of dissipate that water and that energy, places to store the water, areas to be flooded that are expendable, and they're even doing things like floating houses. You can actually buy a floating house in Rotterdam now and, live on a house that floats up and down on the river. It's like that, gigantic. It's not like, a little houseboat. It's like a normal size apartment complex. So to me, that's the best reason to do it, is that, there's no reason if you can afford to do it, not to hedge your bets. And even better, it's definitely cheaper to adapt now than it is and plan and prepare for the future than it is to suffer the consequences and have to react in a much more expensive manner. Especially because short-term, a lot of adaptation is preparing. It's just planning. It's not necessarily that expensive. So that you're planning to spend money in the future if you need to. And so to me, that's the best argument. It's like hedge for the future, prepare and plan now, and in the sort of cheapest possible way, such that you're ready. You're ready to go if something does happen as conditions change. Again, whatever the cause of that is. So to me, that's probably the best way to sort of articulate it in the U.S. So, and it's too bad it's become polarized in the U.S. because it's sort of like saying, no, I'm not going to adapt. Well, yeah, but we've been preparing for changes in climate for 10,000 years. I mean, agriculture is a climate adaptation. So the whole idea that we're not going to prepare for something just because it's a political ideological issue is just sort of, it's kind of silly. Like, I'm not going to buy fire insurance for my house because it's a political issue. Some people don't, I guess, but.
Well, and I would like to just throw in that one of the things that keeps coming back to me through this whole process is that we don't need 100% of the people behind us, but those
That's
people
correct.
that are listening to us and aren't as engaged and involved and attached to the outcome as we are, they need to hear from us, what are we asking them to do?
Yep.
When, save the whales, that was easy, that, just don't buy whale meat, but
Right.
what is it that we're asking people to do about climate change? And that's where I think our watershed groups are in a great position to bring it home, to make it local, and to be clear that, whether it's water conservation or in-stream flows or, protecting salmonids, there's something specific that you're asking people to do, and then we don't have to engage them on every darn thing.
Exactly. No, that's a really important point. The let's see, what you started off with by saying, what was your very first initial point?
What are we asking them to do?
Well, that we don't need 100%.
100%, exactly. I think that's a very important point because that sort of goes back to that sort of slumbering center of people that are receptive but kind of just, you're right, don't know exactly what to do. So yeah, that's a really good point, Wendy, in terms of, you're right, in terms of what can they do that's important to them, that protects their values, that also, help manage climate or help adapt to climate. I think the sustainability framing is a really good one. A lot of the cities I've worked with over the last 5 years have used that framing, sort of quality of life and sustainability. It's a little bit loaded because sustainability in the 90s, like, nobody really knew what it was. It was kind of like another version of tree hugging. But now sustainability, I think, has sort of matured, and it's really become about quality of life in terms of the environment, about equity, about social justice. So to receptive audiences, sustainability is a good framing for sort of saying, this is one of many things we do to protect our environment, to protect our quality of life, to improve our quality of life, and, by the way, to become more resilient to climate change. So, and to, sort of make our society sort of more equitable. So the whole, because really what we're looking at now overall, I don't know, how much you guys like read Bill McKibben or other types of sort of environmental intellectuals, but this whole idea about transition, how are we transitioning our society to a more sustainable mode? I mean, climate's kind of becoming part of the vehicle for that discussion. So I think you guys are right on the ground floor of that as well. So kind of as the environmental movement sort of matures from where it was.
Well, and the other question I have is, do you have any good climate jokes?
I'm really bad at remembering jokes, but the one slide that gets constantly used that I see almost everybody's talk is these bunch of guys at the climate negotiation. They're in a big room. It's the UN, and there's this guy on the guy on the screen is listing all these really good things to do. Protect the environment. Conserve water. Listing all these things that help. With climate change. And then the guy's talking to his friend. He goes, "What if we do all these great things and it turns out to be a hoax?" So
Right.
So that's kind of the crux of the issue right now, is that the whole debate about whether it's a hoax or not is just silly, because I know that there's political values embedded in all these debates, but it's like people are basically saying, no, I'm on ideological grounds, I'm not going to conserve water, I'm just going to waste it. I'm going to waste energy, so because I'm ideologically opposed to saving energy. I mean, it just makes no sense. I mean, because even if you're really conservative, there are bottom line issues to all these things. There's always a cost and benefit, if you just want to be completely focused on that one part of it. For doing these, right, our face at this point in some people, because of the way they're looking at it. So that's a good question.
Most people see me as way too dire on this subject, and and
Okay.
it is a lot to walk around with him. Sometimes I feel like my brain's going to explode, and that doesn't help the situation. But trying to focus on lightening up a little bit and letting people feel good about maybe the small steps they are taking.
Exactly. I mean, the solutions orientation towards things people can do. I mean, we always were advocating, when I was working with these local urban governments, innovation. That innovation comes at the local level by people doing stuff. I mean, one of my favorites is this flood control technology, where if you want to protect your, let's say, the entrance to your parking garage, you embed it it embeds in the pavement. And then there's a grate, and water flows into the grate when you're having a flood, and it floats a buoy that raises a flood wall. So the more water that flows into the grate, the higher the wall goes. So it's a completely passive technology. You don't have to do anything. When the flood starts, the water flows into the grate, the buoy floats up, the wall gets raised, and it raises to the appropriate level depending on the flood. So to me, that's a really, this one guy had this little business doing this, and to me, that's a compelling innovation. So to me, that's another thing, is not only to say you can feel good, there are solutions to these problems, and there are things that you can do to address them, but you can also come up with new solutions. You can innovate. I mean, I think that's another really good thing to convey to people in terms of that sort of positive message.
I think that's really important, too, because I think a lot of the climate change deniers, what they fear the most is the decline of our quality of life. How are we going to make money and drive big-ass trucks and all these things we apparently love to do? But if the innovators can make money off their inventions, that's a good thing.
Exactly.
Well, are there any other questions coming in? Or
Amelia, I have a question, comment. So this is related to something that Josh said earlier. He said, other places in other countries, especially like the Netherlands, are already seeing the effects of climate change. Well, in this last year, we've all seen really extreme weather events, and there was some survey, I can't even remember what it was, but basically indicating what's intuitive, that people tend to believe things when they see it, and so all these extreme weather events that have occurred in the last year, and even, people start to reflect in the last 5-10 years, maybe it is lending some credibility to what climate scientists have been saying for a while. Yet, it is not possible, from what I understand, scientifically, to actually link these weather events to climate science. And I just wanted to get your perspective on that and how to message on that, what seems to be one of the most obvious things to talk about that, people are seeing happening all over the country, yet we're not, scientifically able to make that link.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, on the plus side, you're correct. Most of the folks I've worked with over the years, local governments, they were able to start doing adaptation planning processes because of some significant triggering climate event, like a major flood or heat wave or drought or something like that. These extremes are definitely helping convey to people that there is something going on. There's some extremes of variability that are a little bit out of the ordinary. And the sort of two ways that at the moment that the climate community approaches it, one way is to say, well, we can't attribute any single event to climate change. And, the scientific community, I think, is a little overly conservative. I mean, they are correct in a strict scientific sense that you can't. But there is work going on to link the two, and I'll get to that in a second. But to say, so one way to look at it is to say, this is what we would expect in a climate change world. So this is not something that's happening down the road, but we sort of are predicting these sorts of extremes. Now they're happening, and to some degree they're happening faster than we ever predicted. So that's one way of talking about it. The other thing is that there is a fair amount of work going on in the climate community, climate research community, not super publicized yet because it's still sort of early, trying to tease out the noise to say, yes, you can actually say whether an event is driven more variable or more extreme because of climate change or not. There was a big debate a couple of years ago with the hurricanes in the Gulf, that the Gulf was warmer, Gulf of Mexico was warmer, so therefore we had a whole bunch of hurricanes as a consequence, and that drove them to be bigger and more intense. Tremendous debate in the climate science community about whether that was a true statement, but generally, and that's one reason sometimes it's hard to publicize, but generally there was a sense that the background conditions were warmer. I mean, there's actually, so therefore they drove the hurricanes. Whether you could attribute any single hurricane to a warmer event, there's a video online which talks about equates climate change to a baseball player on steroids. So this whole idea that if you pump up the background conditions, if you put more heat in the system, that you'll expect things to be more extreme, even if you can't attribute any particular event to climate. So that's the way I would talk about it. I would talk about it that this is what we would expect, this is what we kind of forecasted as happening in a climate change world, and the idea that there are background conditions that are kind of amping up the system. And maybe we're not sure of all the connections yet, but that amping, that sort of increasing the background baseline of heat, temperature is going to drive these sorts of what we're seeing now. So, and again, at some point, there's starting to be work on that. Kevin Trenberth from the National Center for Atmospheric Research, he's actually good at, he's actually doing some of this work, and he's got some pretty credible saying, yes, you actually can attribute, this temperature trend this spring to climate change, and he's putting it out there, So
that's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
One more, if there's one more question out there. Well,
one more.
Anything else, Josh?
Well, I was just going to say that to Wendy's things about, we're walking around with all this dire stuff in our head. Luckily, I mean, we have some degree of time to reverse climate change if we're going to tackle it. I'm a little bit skeptical because of the amount of effort it's going to take, but, that's another issue. I think we have time to adapt. That the problem is neither probably going to be, it's not maybe as dire as we think it is going to be, nor as benign as we think it's going to be. I mean, there's probably going to be surprises. They're going to take us off guard. They're going to be pretty extreme. But it's not like, I don't think it's going to be like everybody says it's the end of civilization or the end of the world or we're all going to die. I mean, that's just way too over the top. So just sort of countering the extremes, I think, is kind of with, good science and good solutions and stuff like that, I think is really sort of, that's how I sort of don't worry, don't cripple myself with thinking about the problem, because I think that it's going to be somewhere in the middle of everything, with some extremes, obviously, but I think we can manage it. So.
And we are going to need innovations to make it less dire. That's been clear from the get-go. I just really want to thank you, Josh, for doing this for us today. I was so glad to meet you, too, and to have somebody that we can call and ask questions of if we get too far out into the ozone of the Internet information world. Just before we go today, though, I want to remind people that we are going to be asking you after your last peer group meeting to give us a little project write-up on what you have been able to do. And so that will be sometime in May. Probably that we'll be looking for those. We'll also be doing some case study interviews with some of you. Mark and I will, to kind of pull together some of the lessons learned and put some things on our website on what is working for everybody. Hopefully most of you are going to be at Rally. Before we know it, it's going to be right here. And it's going to be really great to meet everybody and see everybody and collect your ideas and further evaluation about how this whole experience has worked for you.
Josh, this was great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity. There's some really good questions that you guys had, and I applaud your work on the local level. You guys are, again, on the front lines and having worked some with local folks. I kind of wish I was working even more at the local level with you guys, but I hope I can sort of facilitate your work, in the future.
Well, to just go on your comment